Ladies and gentlemen, today I want to speak to you about one of the greatest truths known to mankind, the power of God to transform a life. All across the world, people search for meaning, hope, and purpose. They look for fulfillment in wealth, success, relationships, and material things, yet they still feel empty inside. But I am here to tell you today that there is only one true source of transformation, and that is God. God's power to transform a life is one of the most profound and undeniable truths in the world. From the beginning of time, we see how God has taken broken, weak, and sinful people and made them new. His power is not limited by human failures, nor is it restricted by our past mistakes. When God steps into a life, he brings change that is deep, lasting, and undeniable. The transformation that God brings is not just about behavior modification or turning over a new leaf. It is a complete renewal of the heart, mind, and soul. It is not something we can accomplish through our own efforts, nor is it dependent on our own strength. Many people try to change themselves through self-help books, therapy, discipline, and willpower. While these things may provide temporary relief or improvement, they do not address the deeper problem. The human heart is naturally inclined toward sin, and no amount of effort can truly change the nature of a person apart from God. Throughout history, we see the evidence of God's transformative power. He took Moses, a man who was once a fugitive and full of fear, and made him into a leader who delivered an entire nation. He took David, a shepherd boy, and transformed him into a king. He took Peter, a fisherman who struggled with doubt, and made him into a bold preacher whose words brought thousands to salvation. Over and over again, the Bible reveals how God changes people from the inside out. Perhaps one of the most dramatic examples is the story of Saul of Tarsus. Saul was a man who was completely opposed to God's plan. He persecuted Christians, seeking to destroy the early church. He was convinced that he was right, blinded by pride and religious zeal. But then, on the road to Damascus, God met him. In a moment, everything changed. Saul fell to the ground, blinded by a heavenly light, and heard the voice of Jesus calling him. That encounter transformed him completely. The man who once breathed threats against Christians became Paul, one of the greatest apostles in history. His heart was changed, his purpose was redirected, and his life was never the same again. That is the power of God's transformation. This kind of change is not just reserved for biblical figures. It is something that happens every single day. There are men and women across the world who have experienced the power of God in their lives. People who were once addicted to drugs and alcohol but are now free. People who lived in anger and bitterness but have now found peace. People who were once lost in sin but are now living with purpose. One of the greatest things about God's transformation is that it is not dependent on who we are or what we have done. Many people believe that they are too far gone for God to change them. They think their sins are too great, their past too dark. But the truth is, there is no one beyond the reach of God's grace. The Bible tells us that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. He meets us in our brokenness and makes us new. When God transforms a person, he does not just change their outward actions, he changes their desires. The things that once seemed important lose their hold. The sins that once had power over them lose their grip. A heart that was once drawn to darkness begins to crave righteousness. This is why true transformation is not about rules or religious rituals. It is about a relationship with God that changes everything. But for this transformation to take place, a person must be willing. God does not force himself upon anyone. He calls, he invites, he offers, but he does not compel. Each person has a choice. Will they continue to live in their own strength, struggling under the weight of their burdens? or will they surrender to the one who can make them new? Surrender is the key to transformation. It requires humility, the willingness to admit that we cannot change ourselves. It requires faith, trusting that God is able to do what he has promised. And it requires obedience, the willingness to follow where he leads. Once a person surrenders to God, the process of transformation begins. It is not always instantaneous, and it is not always easy. There will be struggles, moments of doubt, and times when the old ways try to creep back in. But God is faithful. He does not begin a work in someone's life only to abandon them halfway. He walks with them, strengthens them, and molds them into the person he created them to be. A transformed life is a testimony to God's power. It is a light in the darkness, a witness to the world. It is living proof that no one is too broken for God to heal, no one is too lost for him to find, and no one is too sinful for him to redeem. When God changes a life, it is for his glory and for the good of those around them. Families are restored, relationships are healed, entire communities can be impacted by the power of one transformed life. This is the promise of God. No matter who you are, no matter where you have been, he is able to change you. He is able to take the mess of your past and create something beautiful. He is able to take your weaknesses and turn them into strengths. He is able to take the deepest pain and replace it with peace. If you are searching for real change, if you are tired of trying and failing, if you feel like you are beyond hope, know this: God has the power to transform you. He is ready and willing to make you new. All you have to do is come to him, surrender your life, and trust in his perfect plan. That is the power of divine transformation. That is the hope that is available to all who believe. Faith is the foundation of true transformation. It is not merely believing in the existence of God, but trusting in him completely, his power, his love, and his ability to change a life from the inside out. Many people attempt to change themselves through effort, discipline, or self-improvement. But lasting transformation is only possible through faith in God. Faith begins with recognizing our need for God. Without him, we are powerless to overcome sin, weakness, and the struggles of life. The human heart is naturally inclined toward selfishness and wrongdoing, and no amount of personal effort can erase that reality. People often try to fill their emptiness with material success, relationships, or temporary pleasures. But none of these things bring true fulfillment. The Bible makes it clear that without faith, it is impossible to please God. Transformation is not about working harder or being better. It is about surrendering to God and allowing him to work within us. This surrender requires trust. Many hesitate to fully trust God because they fear losing control. They wonder what will happen if they let go of their plans and allow God to lead. But faith means believing that God's plans are greater than our own. It is understanding that his wisdom far exceeds human understanding. When a person places their faith in God, they are no longer bound by fear of the future. They begin to walk in confidence, knowing that their life is in the hands of a loving and all-powerful God. Faith also changes our perspective. Instead of viewing challenges as obstacles, we begin to see them as opportunities for growth. Instead of being controlled by anxiety and doubt, we develop a sense of peace, knowing that God is in control. The storms of life will still come, but faith allows us to stand firm, knowing that God will guide us through every trial. One of the most powerful aspects of faith is that it brings a new identity. When a person comes to God in faith, they are no longer defined by their past. The mistakes, failures, and regrets that once held them captive lose their power. God gives them a new purpose and a new identity as his child. This transformation is not just an external change. It is a renewal of the heart and mind. Old desires fade and new passions arise. The things that once seemed important lose their grip, and the desire to live according to God's will becomes the driving force in life. This transformation is not something that happens instantly. It is a process. Faith is not a one-time decision, but a daily choice to trust God in every situation. There will be moments of struggle, times of doubt, and seasons of waiting. But through it all, faith keeps us anchored, reminding us that God is always working, even when we do not see it. The key to transformation is not trying harder, but believing deeper. When we truly place our faith in God, he takes what is broken and makes it whole. He replaces fear with courage, despair with hope, and weakness with strength. Faith is not just the first step. It is the foundation that sustains and guides a transformed life. A transformed life is a testimony to God's power, a living reflection of his grace and truth. When God changes a person, it is not just an internal experience. It becomes visible in every area of their life. They begin to think differently, speak differently, and act differently. Their priorities shift. Their desires are renewed, and their purpose is realigned with God's will. One of the first signs of a transformed life is a renewed love for God. A person who has experienced his power no longer sees faith as a duty, but as a relationship. They desire to spend time with him in prayer, to learn from his word, and to grow in their understanding of his truth. Their heart is no longer divided between the things of the world and the things of God. Instead, they develop a deep hunger for righteousness, seeking to please God in all they do. This transformation also affects the way they treat others. A person who has encountered God's love begins to extend that love to those around them. Forgiveness replaces bitterness. Compassion replaces indifference. They no longer live only for themselves, but seek to serve and uplift others. Their words bring encouragement, their actions reflect kindness, and their presence becomes a source of peace and hope. Living a transformed life also means walking in obedience. Before encountering God, a person may have followed their own desires, making decisions based on personal gain or worldly success. But when God changes a heart, obedience becomes a natural response. They no longer resist his guidance, but embrace it with trust. Even when his ways are difficult to understand, they walk by faith, knowing that his plans are always for their good. This new way of living is not without challenges. The world may not understand the change, and there may be pressures to return to old ways. But a truly transformed person stands firm, relying on God's strength rather than their own. They do not conform to the patterns of the world, but live as an example of God's grace. Ultimately, a transformed life is not just about personal change. It is about making an impact. Others begin to see the difference, and their lives are touched as well. A single life changed by God can influence families, communities, and even generations to come. That is the power of transformation. A life that shines as a testimony to the goodness, mercy, and love of God. The power of God to transform a life is undeniable. From the deepest brokenness to the highest calling, he is able to take what is lost and make it found, to take what is weak and make it strong. True transformation does not come from human effort, self-discipline, or worldly success. It comes from faith, faith that surrenders, faith that trusts, and faith that allows God to work in ways beyond our understanding. When a person truly experiences God's transforming power, everything changes. Their heart is renewed, their purpose is redefined, and their life becomes a testimony to his grace. They no longer walk in fear, but in faith. No longer live for themselves, but for the glory of God. Their past no longer holds them captive because they have been given a new identity. They become a light to the world, a vessel of God's love, and a living example of what He can do in the life of someone who surrenders to Him. The question today is this: are you ready for that transformation? Are you willing to let go of your burdens and trust God to make you new? No matter who you are or where you have been, His invitation is open to you. He is not looking for perfection. He is looking for a willing heart. If you come to Him in faith, He will change you from the inside out. He will break the chains that bind you, restore what has been lost, and fill you with a peace that surpasses all understanding. You don't have to carry the weight of your past any longer. You don't have to keep searching for meaning in things that will never satisfy. God is ready to do a work in your life. The only question is, will you let Him? Surrender to Him today and experience the life-changing power of His grace. You will never be the same again.